Hey y'all, and welcome back to Carbon Scoring, the best place for comics history and action figures, and home of the mystery box. And today we are looking at that hitman, that anti-hero, the Punisher. I actually got a couple of requests to do a Punisher mystery box, so I put one together. I grabbed most all of my Punisher figures, every one that I could find, and let's take a look, because for somebody who has a really consistent looking costume, a lot of these figures are going to look a lot alike. There's a fair amount of backstory with the Punisher. So let's go ahead and begin with the very first appearance of the Punisher. So this is a Toy Biz figure from 2006. This is in the Face Off series, and this is meant to represent the first appearance Punisher from Amazing Spider-Man 129. And I actually was able to use this figure to recreate the cover of Amazing Spidey 129. I think it worked out pretty well, pretty cool. The Punisher was the brainchild of writer Jerry Conway. He was the writer on Amazing Spider-Man. He was a classic Marvel writer at the time. And in 1974, he had been reading these kind of serialized paperbacks about a character called the Executioner, someone who had lost his family to mafia-related things and then was seeking vengeance. And so if that sounds familiar, that's pretty close to the origin of the Punisher. So Jerry Conway, as a writer, would make sketches. He would give his artist like a little idea of his concept for the character. And he drew out the Punisher with like a little skull and crossbones logo up on the chest. Well, Marvel's art director at the time was John Romita Sr., and he took that and then converted it into this costume, which, while it has changed over the years, has still pretty much been the same, with the huge skull coming down to the belt with the ammo. This figure really captures that initial look from 1974 with the slicked back hair and the widow's peak. I think it just really does a great job of capturing that. And the issue was drawn by Ross Andru. So the three of them, Jerry Conway, John Romita Sr., and Ross Andru, are pretty well credited with the creation of the Punisher. Now, the Punisher was a bad guy. He's a vigilante. He's someone who takes the law into his own hands. And while he was probably designed to be an anti-hero, I mean, he was clearly a bad guy in Amazing Spider-Man 129. And over the next several years, he would show up in issues of Daredevil. He would pop back up in Spider-Man. I think he was in a couple of issues of Captain America. He was kind of this, is he a real bad guy? Is he an anti-hero? Kind of, not really knowing, where to go with him. And it wasn't until the 1980s that the character really kind of found his stride. And that was with the 1986 Punisher Limited series. And I want to see if I can find the Toy Biz figure. It's right here. So this is the Toy Biz Marvel Legends. I think this came out in 2004. It was in Series 4 of Marvel Legends, so relatively early in the run. And you talk about a classic Punisher logo. This one's got it. Now, he still has kind of that John Romita Sr. superhero costume with white gloves, white boots, still kind of looks like a comic book character. This one has more like tactical pants. They probably use that from some other character. But what this one has that other figures don't is this has a face that I think really looks like the art from that 1986 miniseries. So the Punisher was just kind of a bit character. But then when this 5-issue series came out, he really exploded. It was the work of writer Stephen Grant teamed up with artist Mike Zeck. Now, Mike Zeck was a burgeoning superstar at that point. He had done a lengthy stint on Captain America and then had just finished doing the main art for Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. But he took his art to an entirely new level on this Punisher miniseries, including these covers that were like painted or airbrushed. I mean, they are absolutely incredible. And so between Zeck's art and Grant's like really great writing of this anti-hero character, the Punisher exploded. And I think it's important to like think back to what was going on in 1986. I mean, in comics in that year, you had the publication of The Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller's seminal Batman story, where Batman really is much more of an anti-hero, where the ends justify the means. You're still dealing with the Rambo phenomenon. Rambo Part 2 had come out in 1985, and that type of character was incredibly popular in the public consciousness. So it was just the perfect time for the Punisher to really explode. And I mean, explode he did. He became one of the most popular characters in all of Marvel publication, to the point that he had 4 ongoing titles at one point in the late 80s. You know, that's more than the X-Men and Spider-Man had. And so when Toy Biz got the license to make the Marvel superhero line in like 1989, 1990, who was in the very first series but Frank Castle, the Punisher? Not the Fantastic Four, not Wolverine, the Punisher. And this is the one that I got back then, back in like 1989. Now, there were several different versions of this figure. This is like the second version because it has this mechanism back here, which you would put his weapon in his hand and you'd wind it up, and it's supposed to sound like a gun going off. I mean, it's just a classic, wind up mechanism. But the very first one actually came with cap firing action. You actually had the old, like, little gunpowder caps that would go in and you would click and it would, make like a smoke, like a 1970s toy gun would have gun caps. Most of you have no idea what I'm talking about. The ones who do know what I'm talking about can actually smell those caps right now. It's such a distinctive smell. There was another version of this figure that came with his trench coat, and it was this really flimsy brown piece of like vinyl plastic. But that gives you an idea of just how popular the Punisher was at that time. So one of our earliest Punisher figures. Super, super cool. If this combination of comics, history, and action figures is your thing, then subscribe to Carbon Scoring, because we're bringing it to you every week. The Punisher has had a number of different looks in a number of different lines. This is not a Famous Covers. Those of you who have been followers of the channel know that the Marvel Famous Covers line, the 9-inch figures that were meant to kind of replicate the Mego figures of the 70s, are one of my all-time favorites. This was Hasbro's attempt to kind of revive and revitalize that line, and they did come out with some new characters, the Punisher being one of them. Pretty classic Punisher looking. He's got, pretty good articulation under here, cloth costume, new head sculpt right there, and of course the belt and his classic skull logo. Very, very cool. So the Punisher, like I said, was insanely popular to the point where he had multiple books going on. This figure, this is actually Jigsaw. This is the Jigsaw from that face-off from that very first figure that we looked at. Because the Punisher tends to, he tends to kill the people that he's going up against. It's really hard for him to have long-term enemies. But Jigsaw has kind of become his number one bad guy and nemesis. We got a newer Jigsaw figure as a Marvel Legends exclusive. It's really cool. But the head sculpt on this one from 2006 is still outstanding. I don't ever remember when Jigsaw was wearing Punisher's costume, but I'm sure it happened somewhere in the books. Okay, before we move forward, we got to talk about Punisher's movie history, because this is a dude who has actually been shown on film numerous times. Before we saw these two guys, he actually was portrayed by Dolph Lundgren, the bad guy from Rocky IV in a Punisher film. It was really bad because he didn't have the classic skull, which is like such a waste. I mean, that's obviously the whole look of the Punisher. But then in, I believe, 2004, Thomas Jane played the Punisher with a pretty classic look. He has Blade's jacket with all the places for Blade's knives and everything. This jacket is kind of a soft pleather type of material. It is definitely, a little worse for wear over the last 20 years. And then John Bernthal, in what is now, I guess, MCU canon, played the Punisher in the Netflix series, and apparently is going to be coming back to the role in the upcoming Daredevil Born Again. So hopefully we'll get to see more of him shortly. Again, you've got a pretty classic, a little bit, scuffed up look. He's got his jacket, but, decent head sculpt there for this one. So Punisher has made his way onto film, but it's really the comics where his greatest portrayal has been. And this kind of represents that next wave of Punisher comics. After his peak in the 80s and 90s, he kind of cooled down. Marvel had changed, and it wasn't until Joe Quesada kind of took over as Marvel editor-in-chief and introduced the Marvel Knights line that Punisher really had a home, because with his gritty style, with his storytelling, it was hard for him to just be on, regular shelves. But Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon did a Punisher series that really got kind of to the roots of the character. He was grim, he was gritty, he was a vigilante, but there was some dark humor in there that kind of let you know that, yeah, he's sort of in on the joke. Now, at that time, the covers were done by Tim Bradstreet, and he did these incredible painted covers, and this early Hasbro Punisher is meant to represent that art style. He had a more stylized skull. He had a very distinctive face that you can see here, and there's numerous examples of that, including this 12-inch figure. So again, this is meant to represent a Bradstreet Punisher. Pretty cool. The Marvel Icons line, I believe, is where this came out of, and we got some good ones. We got like Beast and some really great ones. This is maybe one of the weakest ones, but it certainly does have that classic Tim Bradstreet Punisher look. There's one more that really shows it. Yes, here it is. This is arguably the most accurate to his artwork. This is the first Marvel Select Punisher. So when Marvel Select first premiered, they had some severe restrictions on what kind of action figures they could make. They could really only make Marvel Knights characters, which is why the first few characters were Ultimate Spider-Man and then Punisher and then like an Ultimate Black Widow type of figure. And there was massive restrictions on their articulation. This dude has nothing from the waist down, and then just basically just shoulders and this head. That's it. I think, in a little bit at the wrist. That's it. I mean, it is not very articulated at all, but the sculpting is outstanding, and the face sculpt just gets those chiseled lines and really brings Bradstreet's art to life in three-dimensional form. So good. This is also the figure that came with the bad guy who's been thrown through a pinball machine with a hand grenade in his mouth. Unfortunately, I don't have that in this box, but it was one of the all-time great accessories ever included with an action figure. Punisher kept going. He continued to be very popular. Here he is with another kind of Hasbro Marvel Legends, kind of a mix. He's got on his trench coat jacket, this jacket that we saw on like a bazillion different figures, but a much more classic logo. Got his 5 o'clock shadow and a very traditional Frank Castle face right here. They redid this figure with not as much 5 o'clock shadow. It's the same skull, but not as much 5 o'clock shadow. But then he has the red skull. I believe that this represents his time serving with the Thunderbolts, that he had kind of the red skull pattern on there at that point. Let's look at some more figures, because there's so many good ones. This one is awesome. Like, it's so awesome, I actually included it on the thumbnail. Now, I don't know the comic backstory behind this. I don't know when Punisher painted his face up to match his chest logo, but here he's got, tactical jacket, tactical camo. All of these things came with a million weapons, and we'll look at a bag of weapons here shortly. But what a cool look for the Punisher to actually have all of that detail of his face paint right there. Very, very choice. And there was one, here's that early Hasbro figure, that same one that we saw, kind of that first Tim Bradstreet figure. I'm looking for it behind me. This is that same version. Here we go. This is that same version of this figure, just repainted with a different logo with the face paint and kind of the camo. So it's kind of one of the early Hasbro variants, I think, that came out early in the line. Kind of cool. I don't know the backstory of this one, but I mean, it's definitely a pretty cool Punisher figure. Okay, when it comes to Punisher, you gotta have weapons, right? And over the years, I wasn't as good about keeping track of all my accessories before I started this channel. So this is a giant bag of weapons. So there's some of Punisher's guns are certainly in here, but this is just kind of where this is my armory where I go to go find stuff, when I'm missing it. Definitely some more cool ones. Arguably one of the best Punisher figures ever made is the Mezco 112 version. So Mezco has been known to take a classic figure and do their own spin with it. They'll make it just a little bit more their style. And of course, their figures come with these incredible bases where the character's logo is on there. That works so well for the Punisher. And these are great bases. They really do a good job of holding the figure up. Here is their version of the Punisher. And so in this case, again, you've got that cloth costume that you get with the Mezco figures. I put on the really battle-damaged, beat-up, black-eyed, broken nose head sculpt. But what you'll see is in this one, his body armor is where you get the Punisher logo on his chest. Such a cool figure. Really, it works. He's got his blade. You can even see like the Kevlar pattern on this. But that was a pretty cool update for this figure. And of course, he came with a literal arsenal of weapons. I still have, I think, most of them here in the bag. There was also a couple of alternate heads for this one. Here is a screaming, angry Frank Castle head. And here is kind of your standard Frank Castle. Again, it kind of borrows from both Mike Zeck's look with sort of that broken nose, as well as the Tim Bradstreet look. All of these weapons that came with this figure, that's a grenade launcher. You think about how much trouble you can cause with a grenade launcher. Absolutely stunning. Punisher has been, he's been in a number of different stories. There was a time after one of the big Marvel events, I can't remember if it was Dark Reign or one of those, where James Rhodes had been killed. I think we all know how comic books work when you are killed. But at that time, Nick Fury Jr. was able to obtain Rhodey's War Machine armor and gave it to Frank. And so Frank took the War Machine armor, painted his logo on the chest, and served as a time as War Machine. Now, if Frank Castle was a killing machine with just, a Glock in his hand, imagine what he was able to accomplish with some Tony Stark armor, particularly the War Machine armor. So this was a Marvel Legends figure. I can't remember. I think this might have been a Walgreens exclusive. I'm not exactly sure, but very, very choice. Now, we've gotten a relatively new Punisher figure, and this one really details a very specific time frame for the Punisher as well. During kind of the height of Punisher mania, when he had multiple titles going on, there was Punisher War Journal. And an up-and-coming artist named Jim Lee took over that title and really kind of started to make his name. This is what Jim Lee was doing prior to taking over the X-Men books, and then subsequently now prior to taking over all of DC Comics. But this suit with the black boots, the black gloves, the black everything with just the Punisher logo, and then the headband really screams Jim Lee Punisher War Journal. So really cool. There's another one so there's two Punishers that somehow don't seem to have made it into this bag. One of them was the original Walgreens exclusive Punisher, which was a very modern take on the character, and the other was the Punisher that came on the motorcycle that I think represented Jason Aaron's time on the title. But for me, the most classic Punisher is the one that came on the retro card back. It's the same body as the Walgreens exclusive Punisher, but instead of having the modern armor and stuff, it goes back to that John Romita Sr. design. White gloves, white boots, the ammo belt coming up to form the teeth of the skull. Now, on this one, I actually took off the Hasbro head sculpt and have a custom head sculpt because I think this looks much more like Mike Zeck's version of the Punisher. And I have to apologize, I don't remember where I got this head sculpt, where I got this custom head from. I'll look it up, and if I can figure it out, I'll put the answer in the description. But look at how great that is. Look at that snarling face with the slicked back hair, with that crunched brow, and then the broken nose, the bridge of his nose. This is like Mike Zeck totally come to life, and just a fantastic Punisher. And this is the one that I have on display down in my secret lounge. But there is actually one other Frank Castle figure that I have on display down there. Okay, we are back down in the secret lounge and headed to what might be the absolute last place that you would expect that we would find a Punisher figure, and that is on my Cosmic shelf. Yes, you're going to be surprised by this. So this shelf right here is where I keep my best Cosmic Marvel Legends. You've got the comic versions of Guardians of the Galaxy. You've got Carol Danvers' Binary. Of course, there's Adam Warlock and Thanos. I do have this awesome Death's Head figure, but who do we see over here but none other than the Cosmic Ghost Rider? Yes, that is in fact Frank Castle. In an alternate future timeline, Frank Castle survives and becomes a Herald of Galactus as the Cosmic Ghost Rider. It is one of the coolest stories ever. It was written by Donny Cates, and I actually did an entire video on this because the Cosmic Ghost Rider teams up with Thanos, and basically they destroy the entire universe together. But this is one of the finest Marvel legends that have ever been made. The Ghost Rider comes with this incredible bike that's on a display stand that allows you to get it into this kind of dynamic action pose. If you look right there on the chest, you can see the flaming skull of Ghost Rider, but on his chest is the Punisher symbol. So yeah, he's in there. That is Frank Castle on this crazy space bike. So cool. And I would have pulled it out and taken a look at it underneath the camera lights, but I just love it so much in this display that I didn't want to mess it up. It's just such an awesome part of my Cosmic display and really kind of anchors that entire corner over there. So the least likely Punisher figure you're ever going to find has got to be Frank Castle as the Cosmic Ghost Rider. I hope you guys have enjoyed this Punisher Mysteries box. If so, please give the video a like. And as always, for the best in comics history and action figures, subscribe to Carbon Scoring.